So, good afternoon. It may not be afternoon where you are, but it's afternoon where I am. And I definitely um, wanted to jump back on and pick up where I left off last time. My last video, which was a short video, raised a question. And so I wanted to come back and address that question. So, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And hopefully, this is helpful. So the last video asked the question of what do we do with unconditional love? Is that a real thing? Does it exist? Does anybody participate or believe in that concept anymore? So there's a couple things that I want to kind of point out and list out. And it took me a little while to kind of gather my thoughts and decide on what it was that I actually wanted to say in this video. When I was in grad school, I had to read the book The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. And so in the book, C.S. Lewis points out that this idea, this concept that we have of love can be broken down into four actual categories. So he lists romantic love, which is considered eros. He lists more of like a friendly, like platonic type of a love. He lists agape, which is a word that I've heard in religious circles and faith-based groups use that term. And he lists out the different examples of these different loves. And yes, there is another love in there somewhere. So if it comes to my mind, I'll definitely go ahead and throw it in there. So realizing and recognizing that there are four different loves, there are four different ways that we understand, or should I say, not just ways, also four categories. So we can lump our relationships that we have with various people into some of these different categories. So, that being said, if my memory serves me correctly, C.S. Lewis basically says that we can kind of go through these different categories of love in varying relationships. For example, you may have a friendship that is kind of like a strictly platonic type of a situation, and as you get to know that person gets to know you. As the relationship deepens and becomes more intimate in the emotional sense, it may develop into an eros, or it may develop into an agape. So let me go ahead and just give this as a, not quite a premise, but as a clarification, as an in-depth. Agape is supposed to be like the deepest, most intimate, most fulfilling form of love. It's supposed to be more along the lines of what I raised as far as that unconditional type of a love, right? Agape is supposed to be that love that bears all, endures all. It is just that type of love that you just don't walk away from. Okay. So, would I say that we experience each of these types of loves at various points in our lives? Yes. Do I say that we express these different types of loves in different ways? Yes. I believe that research bears that out. I believe that human experience bears that out. Excuse me for this thing with my nose. Allergies have been horrendous, so I've got a constant thing going. At any rate, I want to address this because in my mind I've been thinking about, so for example, how we deal with our children. That's a different type of a love and a different type of situation than how we say deal with our significant others. How we deal with our significant other is a different situation, different relationship than, say, how we deal with family members, right? And so we can categorize each of those loves in a different way. You may put your significant other in the eros, and you may not put your significant other in agape, because you see them in a romantic sense, and yet there may be something lacking or missing, or something that just hasn't gotten you to that point of classifying that relationship as an agape situation. So one of the reasons that I wanted to kind of go in depth and wanted to bring this up and wanted to address this is because I was thinking about how, I believe in the short video I mentioned the idea of like walking away from, because we've gotten to this place, and I hear it a lot, about, do I get to walk away from a specific relationship? So say, do I get to walk away from a parent or a sibling because we don't get along, we're arguing all the time, we don't see eye to eye, there's just a lot of disagreement in a lot of different areas, and maybe I do see that relationship as toxic, how do I make sense of all of that? And can I walk away from this relationship if I feel like it's unhealthy for me and unhealthy for my mental health? Well, to answer all of those questions, there isn't really a cut and dry answer. When I'm dealing with people who are considering walking away from any type of relationship, it doesn't matter if it's a familiar relationship or if it's a romantic relationship, and it could be a relationship with a child or a parent. And I always address, what is it that you feel like you would gain from walking away from that relationship? What is it that you feel like you would miss out on if you walk away from that relationship? What is it that you feel like you've gained or lost in the course of the relationship? So the point of, therapies from my perspective is to process, what are the decisions that I'm contemplating here, in order to kind of help you understand why you're making that decision. And then you can kind of go from there and decide on a much clearer course of action based off of, I've decided this course of action because I have an understanding of why I'm doing this and why I'm motivated in this particular direction. And so it may not be a situation of I'm making an impulsive decision. It may be a well thought out, well determined decision, and yet sometimes we still kind of want to balance it out with other thoughts and ideas that we're having. Interestingly enough, I was literally just reading an article in Psychology Today that talked about like how we as humans make decisions. And so it was saying that a lot of times we make our decisions, and I have noticed this with relationships in particular, we make decisions, based off of prior human experience. And that is human nature. We will make our decisions based off of prior human experience. So do I walk away from a romantic involvement, a situation where I really do have a connection emotionally with this individual? However, it's not a perfect situation. It's not meeting all of my expectations. So therefore, can I justify walking away from that relationship based off of that? Because at some point in my prior history, there were other relationships that didn't meet my expectations, that were not perfect situations. I do believe that's how we kind of come to conclusions about various things. It's not always based off of prior experience. Now, the caveat, of course, I don't want to say difficulty, but the mistake that we can end up making when we base our decisions off of previous human experience is that we may miss out on the fact that there are subtle differences between the current situation versus the previous situation. And so we may find ourselves making a decision based off of previous experience where, even though there might be similarities to the current situation, it may be a completely different situation altogether. Hopefully that makes sense. I've really just been contemplating this because, again, we may have children that, so for instance, I'll give you a perfect example, right? We know from statistics, from research, that children raised in the same household can experience very different living experiences in the same household, raised in the exact same household, exact same parents, and have totally different experiences. Why is that? And totally different outcomes. Why is that? Particularly when, as parents, parents always seem to believe I'm raising my kids exactly alike, like everything's equal, everything's the same. Your kids are going to have extremely different experiences. Well, why is that? A, because perspectives are different. And B, because even as parents, when we think we're doing things equally and the same, you are categorizing, whether you realize it or not, your children into different, your love for your children is in different categories. And you may not appreciate the truth of that, but it is. Anyway, so I bring that up because every parent that I know always talks about having a favorite. And so you can't have a favorite unless you're kind of categorizing your children, right? That's just the way that that is. That being said, would you disconnect from one versus the other based off of those individualities, based off of those situations? Or even, say you have a relationship with a child that you know you would never walk away from, and then here comes another relationship in your life that's vastly similar to this situation with your child. Now, do you justify, or can you justify walking away from that relationship, which has extreme similarities, even though it's a different type of relationship? So these are questions that we can raise, that we can ask, that we can process through, that we can address whenever we're contemplating these ideas, specifically concerning unconditional love. Coming back to the very premise of the question, what is it, and does it exist, and is it real? I think that depends on the individual's perspective and background. From my perspective, hopefully, as a parent, you would have unconditional love for your child. I think that tends to be most accurate, right? And sometimes it's problematic because some parents are, it's unconditional to a fault. And so even when your children are not decent human beings, unfortunately, that does happen. You want to hang in there with them. And so that's a whole other conversation. At any rate, I think it does exist, and I think that if we're being honest with ourselves, it can exist across various relationships, not just, the parent-child relationship. It can exist in our romantic involvements as well. Am I saying that, we should endure any and everything and get walked over? Absolutely not. That's not something that I would advocate for. I do think that we should still have boundaries. I think that's important, and we should still have ways of mitigating unhealthy situations, for ourselves personally, like, so basically protecting ourselves and insulating ourselves as far as our own mental health from certain things. That being said, we're dealing with humans. We're all human. We all have imperfections, and we're dealing with imperfections. And so coming to understand that and coming to that conclusion, we have to know how to balance that out with our expectation of what we're looking for as far as this idea of unconditional love. So hopefully this helps somebody. If not, I'm sorry. If you have more questions, if you want me to go into more detail or unpack that book and the concepts of that book a little more, let me know. Until next time.